You're listening to the best of Lee Elci on 94.9 News Now.
All right, here in the studio, we're joined now by State Rep Doug Dubitsky. It's been a long time since we had him on. Mike France is still here in the studio, and you guys can call in 860-464-9490. Doug, good morning. How are you?
I'm fantastic.
Well,
thanks for having me in.
Thanks for coming all the way in here. Weaving in and out of the school buses.
Oh yeah, it was. I guess at the end of the long weekend and a rainy day, and kids are going back to school.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who forgot how to drive.
All right, so we haven't really talked a lot since you got the gig as state rep. So before I ask you guys a couple of questions, because I have a couple of questions, how's it? What's your impression as far as the gig?
Well, it's a good gig, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
There's a lot of the things that I had thought were going to happen when I was up there, when I first got up there, didn't happen. I actually thought when I was running that a lot of the people on both sides of the aisle were all well-meaning people that really wanted to push get the state back on its feet,
right,
and really had the best interest of their constituents in mind. And I was sadly disappointed when I got up there that, frankly, there are a number of legislators up there that don't seem to care much about what goes on in this state. They really don't. They like being in the position. They like having the title. They don't really do much except what they're told. And you talk to them privately and you say, "This bill, how could you possibly support this? This is terrible."
Right.
And they go, "Yeah, I know it's a really lousy bill, but the governor really wants it, so we're going to go for it."
Really?
And they sit there, they push the button, they're told to push, and you like shake your head. You're like, how could you possibly want to do this job if that's the decision-making process of when an important bill comes up? Just because the governor wants it, you're going to vote for it? What about all the people that you represent?
Right.
And so I'm up there fighting for the people I represent, and I'm out there talking to them every day. I've got, my contact information out there. People call me, people email me, and I call people back. And I want to know what the people in my district have to say about things that are important.
Well, good for you. I'm glad you do it that way, because I think that's what the people want. And I still always go back to say the idea that, and it's not necessarily a total negative against the party system, but it'd almost be better if you weren't beholden to, the governor. If the governor finds out you didn't vote for him, then all of a sudden, he's spanking you with that big ruler, and it gets even to be more chaos. But if you had convictions and could stand up and kind of vote the way you believe without any repercussions, it might be a better system, no?
Well, I think that's how the party system has evolved. I think that there are things that both Doug and I will vote for based on principle that aren't truly in alignment with our party leadership in this state. Right,
yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And to Doug's point, it's based on our constituents, listening to them and representing them, not the party. I think it's not quite a myth, but it's been played up more. It's really the individual.
Right.
The individual chooses whether they succumb to pressure, whether that be the governor, whether it be perceived party, instead of representing themselves.
Right. Well, first off, I think it was George Washington who said that having a party system will be the death knell of the United States, and he was against having parties from the beginning. I am one of the highest ranked legislators in the legislature of votes against party, because I represent a very rural district, very big with very small towns, and my constituents have different interests than some of the other people in some of the other districts around the state. Right. So I have to represent the interests of the people who put me in office to represent their interests.
Let me ask you, do you get any blowback from Themis when that happens, or Len Fasano when that kind of stuff happens? Do you get, that kick in the shin when you're not looking? You do?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. I know. There are certain issues that are party issues that that most of which I will generally agree with, and most of which my constituents will generally agree with.
Right.
But there are issues that sometimes I think are either off on a tangent and not following what our party stands for. And in those instances, if I think it's in the best interest of my constituents and my constituents tell me that they want or don't want something, I'll go against the party, absolutely. And if there have been times when Len and Themis have looked askance at my vote on certain things, and hey, I love them both dearly, but you know what? I don't work for them.
Good for you.
I work for the people who elected me.
Good for you. I think that's a good step. All right, let me get to some of the things that we wanted to talk about. I got a message from someone who was I really trust, and the issue had to do with guns, and it had to be. And I wanted to bring you on because they had mentioned you in the email that they sent me, that there is some rumblings and bumblings in the legislature here in Connecticut that you guys may be, not you guys, but the legislator may be talking about adapting something similar to the California deal, where you're going to really limit the guns and limit the ammunition like to 500. Can you just give us a little kind of brief synopsis of what you know about that, if anything?
Sure. As you know, and I'm sure all of your listeners know, the Connecticut legislature has been playing leapfrog with California as to who can infringe the most on the Second Amendment rights of their citizens.
Right.
And every time one state does something really onerous, the other state has to jump in and one-up them. And California has recently enacted some really bad stuff. And it is no secret that there are legislators in Connecticut that want to ensure that people in Connecticut can't possess or use anything other than a black powder musket and a single shot. And because their argument is, well, when the Constitution was written, that's all they had. Despite the fact that that's absolutely incorrect, they had large capacity, multiple repeating firearms back then. That is their feeling, and they will do everything they can to funnel the laws towards that goal. California's done some pretty bad stuff recently, and I can almost guarantee that there are people in the legislature that are going to bring up similar things this year.
Anything to add to that?
No, I agree. I think it has been a Me Too syndrome of, if you heard following Sandy Hook, it was how proud they were to be the leader in the country. Well, now they're no longer the leader of this issue. California now has one-upped them as far as being more restrictive of the people's rights. And I think that you're going to see a move, how much impetus it gets actually in the legislature through the process, who knows? But I think Doug is right. There are individuals within the legislature that didn't think that the 1160 went far enough, and they're looking for opportunities, and they're going to point to California and go, Connecticut is doing just what California did. It's not wrong. They passed it, therefore it must be okay. And they're going to pass an agenda-driven, and it's one of the things going back to Doug disappointed with the people. I was disappointed with the bills that got passed that were, from an emotional standpoint, had no basis in objective thought to correct the problem. If you're objective, even about 1160, it would not have prevented the incident that happened. The incident at Sandy Hook was used as an agenda item to further curtail the rights of law-abiding citizens to own weapons. That's what it was used for, and that's what we use these crises for every time. We pass things on emotion while the emotion is high of the average person who at that point is willing to sacrifice their liberty for security. And I believe it's Ben Franklin that had a quote about that is pertinent to it.
A perfect example is, you may remember at one point last year, the governor got up in front of the cameras and said that he was going to prohibit anybody that was on a terror watch list or a no-fly list from obtaining a firearm in Connecticut. And he led that whole effort with a press release. No investigation, no background into how it was actually going to work, or even if it was possible. But he got up with all these people behind him and said, "We're going to do this. We are going to prevent these people from getting firearms." The problem was that, for one thing, his goal was to find some way in Connecticut law to seize firearms without due process. That was the goal. And when it turned out that that mechanism for achieving that goal was completely illegal, completely unachievable, and the feds were not going to participate in it, you didn't hear the press release when he said, "Oh, never mind." You didn't see you didn't see in the press that thing got dropped like a hot potato. So what they did was they moved on to something else, and that something else was a temporary restraining order bill. Temporary restraining order bill said anybody who has a temporary restraining order issued against them without any opportunity to be heard, without any hearing, without anything, has to relinquish all their firearms. Now, there was a way to achieve the stated goal. Their stated goal was to keep domestic violence victims safe from their abusers. There was a better way, a more effective way, and a safer way for domestic violence victims to do that. And it was in a bill that I introduced, but they completely ignored it because their goal was not, in my view, to protect domestic violence victims. Their goal, ultimately, was to find a way in Connecticut law to seize firearms without due process. And they've done that.
There's another story, too, that's out there, and maybe you guys can comment on this, is that they're talking about now, let me see if I can get this straight because somebody had sent me this info. The legalized medical marijuana, if you're on the legalized medical marijuana, you wouldn't be able to have a firearm in your home either. Did you hear anything about that?
Yeah, that was actually a ruling, I think it was by the Ninth Circuit, which that ruling doesn't affect us, but it could well be that that Connecticut legislators decide that that's going to be the case. I'd actually be surprised if that happened here, because I think there is an overriding feeling in, at least on the Democratic side, that they want to entrench marijuana, the legality of marijuana, into Connecticut law, and until they really do that effectively, I don't think they're going to enact something that calls into question whether or not somebody can have medical marijuana. Okay. So I would doubt that that's going to come up.
All right. I would say the premise of that is, to Doug's point, they're making the case that marijuana for medical purposes doesn't have harm for you. And so, but if they bring into a case to say, "Oh, but if you do that, you can't own a firearm," right. Now they're making a counter argument to what their stated goal is, or what their stated agenda is. And I think that is what will bring out, what do you mean? If they can't have a firearm, there must be something bad about this. So how do you get to legalize marijuana? So that's, I think, is, to Doug's point, where their argument falls apart, right, and why they won't go down that path until they get finished the path to legalizing marijuana.
All right, one final thing. We'll take 1 70-second break and come back and talk as much as we can to the top of the hour. Do you think the people, and in your district, which again is very rural, do you think that the people in the state of Connecticut should be nervous that their Second Amendment rights may get eroded pretty substantially here in the next couple of, let's say, election cycles, if in fact you guys don't get the House back or get the Senate?
I think the term will be further eroded. Right. Absolutely. Something's going to come up. The legislature, the Democrats in the legislature are going to put forth some gun control bills. I can almost guarantee that. And the only way to fight it is to have enough people who oppose those bills that can stand up, argue against them, and then vote against them. And if we don't have the numbers, bad stuff is going to get through.
Right. And I would argue that it's even greater at the federal level. If Hillary Clinton is elected president, it doesn't matter what kind of President Obama has proven that he can write an executive order and enact those 3 and 4 letter organizations within the executive branch to create a regulation that has the power of law.
Right.
And you can have the same effect at a national level that could do the same thing and have much worse consequences.
Social media is saying a lot of the same things about you guys. Jack just writes in, he says, need more politicians like these two guys, so keep up the good work.
You're listening to the best of Lee Elci on 94.9 News Now.